Chapter 124 of Oshi No Ko certainly is one that has quite a bit to talk about, from the tease of the return of Ichigo at the end to some of the other characters picking up on Ruby's change in her demeanor following Aqua's confession about being her former doctor in their past life, to Ruby showing signs of breaking down with the people that are closest to her, keeping a keen eye on Ruby the entire time. It's a nice steady build from the chapter we got last week that paid off the whole reincarnation plot thread, while also freaking out a good chunk of the fandom over the fear this Siscon complex would actually turn into a full-blown romance between Aqua and Ruby. So with the initial thoughts out of the way, let's back things up and let's dive into the recap portion of the review before we further unpack the story itself. So the chapter opens up with Ruby leaning over Aqua with her hands wrapped around him, asking him to give her his juice, which Aqua refuses, and this leads to Kana freaking out at the sight of what she's seeing, and Mimcho is giving her the reaction that she's overreacting by calling the sight of Aqua and Ruby together too close and too clingy. When Ruby brushes it off, saying that they've been previously fighting but now they patch things up, it freaks Kana out even more. And the interesting thing here is that Ruby says that everything's been reversed with the words bolded for emphasis, and we have hearts that are all around the speech bubble. Make of that what you will. I personally don't think this is going the route of brother-sister romance, but I know that there are those of you who likely do. It's then we see that Aqua's sister complex is mentioned, and we see Ruby has gone from standing behind him with her arms wrapped around his neck to directly sitting on his lap with her eyes closed, which freaks out Kana even more. But Mimcho is the one who's thinking big brain, and she realizes that this will make a good post for Instagram. We then shift over to a bit of humor that ends up being at the expense of Mimcho, with a good build towards the H joke actually landing. We see Kana keep stressing how much she's grossed out by what she's seeing, and Mimcho tries to play devil's advocate by stating that Ruby's schedule is super packed right now, so depending on Aqua shouldn't be viewed as a bad thing. But Kana, she isn't buying it, calling it more dependency, while also conceding that her depending on Aqua is a good thing if it helps her mental health, but the true root of the problem comes from Ruby's extreme workload. Now, it's then that we get the first few glimpses of just how hard Ruby is working, with the first mention being that of the play, but also having later references to her work as an idol, her schoolwork, and her work on the movie that's in production. Kana shows a softer side by basically saying that she's worried about Ruby, and it does make sense given that we know that she's a former child actor and she's been in show business longer than anyone else in their small circle of entertainers. Kana might be projecting a little bit when she says that Ruby could lose everything if she makes a mistake by pushing herself too hard, but I think her heart is still in the right place, which given where we were when we first got introduced to her, her character's come a long way in terms of character development. Now, Mimcho's the one who brings up the most valid point by saying that Ruby is at a point right now where she's on the incline and she has to keep pushing herself to strike while the iron is hot, and she's not wrong. In this world that we live in right now, people have more options available to them, especially when it comes to entertainment. Once you get through grinding it out, you have to be willing to push ahead even further when you do gain traction, because contrary to popular belief, it's then when you have the attention of people that you have to work even harder. Otherwise, you'll lose the very fan base that you work so hard to build up, and they'll move on to someone else who provides close to or equal value than yourself. Mimcho understands that for an entertainer, you have to keep throwing yourself out there because you're only as big as your last hit. This leads to a hilarious moment where when she hears schoolwork being mentioned, she totally freaks out because she hadn't thought about schoolwork in forever, because given her age, it's a lot higher than the people in the public actually realize, and Kana throws a humorous jab by saying it's ironic she forgot about schoolwork when she's pretending to be a school-age girl herself. It's then that we learn just how much Ichigo did behind the scenes when Hoshino was still alive, because he was the one who stayed on top of making sure that Ai's schoolwork is being taken care of, and we learned that the current president and the adopted mom of Aqua and Ruby is struggling with juggling everything, which isn't hard to believe just given the cracks that we've seen in her character leading up to this chapter itself. Over the course of the last 30 or so chapters, you've seen the stress building. We see her debating clearing Ruby's schedule, but she's also worried about Ruby working too hard, and we see her thinking back to various statements made to her in the past behind the scenes that are pulling her in different directions. On top of that, one telling her to be mindful of Ruby's workload during filming, and then Aqua's cryptic warning to keep Ruby away from an agent that we know is actually actually Ruby's mother from her past life, which basically is Aqua being a decent human being because he knows what will happen if Ruby meets her mother from her past life. Given what we saw in the past chapter and the fact that she has more kids, that's the last thing someone who's been through as much as Ruby needs to see because she'll be shattered. On top of that, we see how Miyako is trying to juggle the future of Komochi since Kana will be leaving the group at the end of the year, while also trying to maximize the potential of the group in the present while not overloading the girls at the same time. But in doing so, she's also overloading herself, which is absolutely ironic. The very thing she's trying to keep Ruby from doing, she's doing to herself, and through these moments we see just how important it is to have a team of people who you can trust. But with some people, even when they have a team, the urge to double down or be hands-on and involved in an extensive process to make sure that things are done the way that you want them. That's the hardest thing for people like that to do, is to let go and trust in others. Something I'm guilty of myself, but by the end of the chapter, we see that she's potentially about to learn that it's okay to trust in others, so long as you trust the right people who can bring out your strengths while covering up your weaknesses with their own strengths. Because Ichigo walks into the bar at 3 a.m. right when she's about to have her meltdown that comes after she was in her office reflecting on their past dream, with the group performing in the dome before I was murdered, and thinking of how Ruby can actually make that Komochi dream come true. I think one thing we can definitely take away from this chapter is the theme of pressure. How certain people handle pressure varies from one person to another, and the lesson that it's okay to depend on others when the pressure gets to be too high, so long as you're trusting in the right people and it's a mutual beneficial relationship. That's always been the thing I've enjoyed about this series, is it's not afraid to take you behind the scenes to the different aspects of entertainment and humanize everyone, from the actors like Akane, who almost killed herself due to the online comments, to seeing how Ruby's friends are worried about her workload in this chapter, to how the woman who is responsible for making sure that Ruby's okay is actually buckling under this pressure. Now, I think we all can agree we went into this chapter waiting for answers for the whole Aqua and Ruby situation that got memed like crazy after release of chapter 123. The idea of us going into this chapter with questions, getting some answers, but leaving the chapter with more questions might frustrate some, but I think that it's something that's needed for the narrative of the story to continue building the stakes for the story. And I like how this chapter made the wise decision to not pick up where the last one left off, but instead jump ahead an unspecified amount of time. And it's implied that when she bends over to suck on Aqua's straw to drink its juice, that she's been practicing with the other two members of Komochi because of their presence in the chapter. And during this time, Aqua's saying that Ruby's sweaty. Again, this creates more questions about what happened following the whole reveal in the last chapter, which likely will get brought up again in passing. And the way that Kana was basically playing the role of the audience was some smart writing as well, especially since last chapter we know that Ruby remembered Aqua's promise to her in their past life that she would get married to him if Ruby was 16 years old, because she's standing in front of that glass door grinning and blushing as she says to herself that she's 16 years old now. Aqua can't hear her because he's on the other side of the door. So again, more questions will get resolved in a delayed payoff, but I think the payoff will come after Ruby inevitably ends up meeting her mother from her past life, because there was too much emphasis being placed on protecting Ruby's state of mind for it not to pan out as a form of foreshadowing. However, I want to know what you guys' thoughts on this are. Is Ichigo coming back to assist Miyako? And if he does, will she find out about him working with Aqua, since they're both working together to get revenge for Ai? And since Ai was like a daughter to Miyako and Ichigo, will this get brought up? Also consider subscribing, because we got more Oshi No Ko videos coming here on the channel, as well as more Oshi No Ko shorts that you can find on the shorts tab.